It started out as any normal suburban friendship. My wife, Emma, and I moved into our cozy neighborhood a few years ago, and over time we got to know most of the folks around us. We became particularly close with the family next door, where Mark and his wife, Sarah, lived. They seemed like the classic friendly couple, always inviting us to neighborhood gatherings, backyard barbecues, the whole package. They had a golden retriever named Buddy, who, as it turns out, became an unexpected whistleblower in the most gut-wrenching way possible. Emma and I had been together for over 10 years, married for 7 of those. Our relationship had its ups and downs, sure, but I never thought it would come to this. Looking back, maybe there were signs. Late nights out, secretive text messages she brushed off as just from friends. But I always trusted her. Hell, I thought we were solid. I had no idea that the biggest betrayal of my life was unfolding right in our own backyard. It all started with Buddy. Mark had recently installed a pet cam to monitor Buddy when he was away. I had no idea about this until the day Mark called me, sounding awkward and a bit embarrassed, saying he had something strange he wanted to show me. Mark came over with his phone, looking visibly uncomfortable. He showed me a clip from his dog cam, and at first, I was confused it was our backyard. But as the video played, I saw Emma and Mark himself, there together, way too close for comfort. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My stomach dropped as I realized they weren't just neighbors anymore. My head was spinning, but I kept watching the clip, feeling like I was in some twisted nightmare. It was surreal, like watching strangers in a movie. Only the strangers were my wife and my friendly neighbor. I could see Emma smiling at Mark, her hand grazing his arm, a look on her face that I hadn't seen in years. And right there, behind the privacy of our fence, just steps away from our home, they were. Together. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it didn't take a genius to figure out this wasn't just friendly chit-chat. Mark was shifting uncomfortably beside me, clearing his throat. He looked downright sick as he told me there were other recordings. Apparently, this wasn't a one-time thing. The next clip showed them laughing, a little too closely, with Mark reaching for her hand. Then there was another video, this time at dusk, where I could barely make out Emma's face as they kissed, her arms wrapped around him in the same way she used to hold me. I felt like I was getting stabbed in the gut with every second that went by. I wanted to storm next door, but Mark grabbed my shoulder. "Listen, man, I don't know how it started, I swear to God," he said. "Sarah, she doesn't know." I had no idea until last night. He told me he'd set up the dog cam because Buddy had been sneaking into our yard, and he wanted to see how. He'd accidentally stumbled on the footage while scrolling through the pet cam files. When I asked him how long this had been going on, he looked down, his face flushed. "A couple of weeks," he muttered. "I think, maybe longer. A couple of weeks?" I felt the bile rise in my throat. I could only manage to ask him why he hadn't said anything sooner. "I thought they just—" "Stop," he stammered. I kept thinking I could ignore it, pretend it was nothing serious. But then it kept happening. I'm sorry, man." Hearing it confirmed out loud was the last straw. I couldn't just sit here and watch more of this. I thanked him, or at least I think I did, and walked straight back to my house, heart pounding, mind racing. It was time for Emma and me to have a serious talk, whether she was ready or not. I paced around the kitchen, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking. My mind was spinning with every possible excuse Emma might throw at me. I didn't know how I was going to confront her, but I knew it was going to happen tonight. Then, as if on cue, the door opened. Emma walked in, balancing groceries and greeting me with that familiar, almost irritatingly sweet smile. I watched her closely, my heart pounding in my chest like it might explode. She didn't have a clue what I'd just seen. "Hey, what's for dinner?" she asked, oblivious. I couldn't help but notice how easygoing she was, like she was coming home from an innocent day out. Not a single crack in her facade. "Not sure yet," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe you could tell me about your day?" She paused, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Oh, busy meetings, errands," she said with a casual shrug, tossing her keys onto the counter. "Meetings?" I repeated. Or maybe hanging out with Mark? That stopped her in her tracks. She looked at me, a flicker of panic crossing her face, but she recovered quickly. What are you talking about? She laughed, a touch too forced. I barely see Mark. I pulled out my phone, opened the video Mark had shown me, and placed it on the counter between us. Barely see him, huh? Then explain this, Emma. She went pale, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Finally, she scoffed, rolling her eyes. Are you serious, Josh? This is nothing. He was just comforting me. I've been stressed, and he's a friend. Comforting, I said, my voice rising. Kissing in the backyard is comforting? How many times have you been sneaking out there while I'm at work, Emma? While I'm in the house? She shook her head, crossing her arms defensively. You're overreacting, she snapped, the friendly tone gone now, replaced with icy irritation. It's just a kiss, Josh. It's not like we were doing anything serious. My head felt like it was about to explode. Not serious? Do you hear yourself? I could hardly believe her nerve. Emma, I have recordings of you meeting him out there at least 3 different times. I have proof. Are you seriously going to sit here and keep lying? She glared at me, her face twisted into something I'd never seen before. Fine, she spat, dropping the pretense. Yes, I've been seeing Mark, but you're hardly around. You're always working, and I needed someone to talk to, someone who's actually here. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd never imagined this. Her blaming me for her own affair, standing in our kitchen like it was just a casual inconvenience in her life. I felt the hurt morph into rage. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even remotely remorseful. So that's it? You're going to throw away our entire marriage because you needed someone to talk to? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What happened to us, Emma? She looked away, her jaw clenched. I don't know, she muttered, finally sounding a little defeated. But things haven't been good for a long time. Maybe it's better this way. I stared at her, realization sinking in that maybe she'd made her choice long before I even knew this was happening. My stomach churned as I took in the stranger standing in front of me, the woman I thought I knew. I thought her lack of remorse was rock bottom, but it turns out I was wrong. There was further to fall. As she stood there, arms crossed, with that defiant tilt to her chin, something in me snapped. Maybe it's better this way? I echoed, barely believing her words. You want to throw away a decade together because things haven't been good? You think a little backyard affair is the answer? She shot me a glare. Oh, come on, Josh. You're acting like everything was perfect. You're always working, always too busy to actually be around. What did you expect? I clenched my fists, my voice cold. I work hard to give us a life, Emma. You think that means I deserve to be betrayed? With our neighbor? In our own backyard? She scoffed, like she was done with pretending. Maybe I needed someone who actually cared enough to be present. Mark was there for me when you weren't. Sorry if that hurts your pride. I was reeling, but I wasn't about to let her off that easy. And what about Sarah? I shot back, her face finally paling as I brought up our neighbor's wife. Do you think she deserves this too? Her lips tightened, but there was no apology in her eyes, just defiance. I wasn't looking for this to happen, Josh. It just did, and maybe that's a sign that we both need something different. Something snapped in me. The realization that she didn't care, that she genuinely thought she was the victim here, left me feeling hollow, like the air had been sucked out of the room. But I wasn't done yet. I needed her to know what she had really done. I turned and headed for the door. Where are you going? She demanded, panic creeping into her voice. Next door, I said flatly, gripping the doorknob. To tell Sarah everything. She deserves to know. Emma's face drained of color, her eyes wide. Josh, wait, she said, her tone shifting to desperation. You don't have to do that. Let's talk this out. I laughed, dark and humorless. Oh, now you want to talk? I shook my head. It's too late, Emma. You don't get to just brush this under the rug. Sarah deserves the truth. She lunged for me, grabbing my arm, her voice low and pleading. Please, Josh, don't. Think about this. You're angry. I get it, but do you really want to blow up everyone's life over this? I looked down at her hand on my arm, as if her touch could fix everything she'd shattered. I shook her off, disgusted. You already blew it up, Emma. I'm just letting everyone else know the blast radius. Without another word, I walked out, letting the door slam behind me. As I crossed the lawn, my pulse pounded, adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't believe this was happening. Our marriage, our lives, all wrecked because of a few stolen moments she couldn't resist. I knocked on Sarah's door, my heart hammering. She opened it, a look of confusion on her face. "Josh, is everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. It's about Mark and Emma." As the words left my mouth, I knew there was no going back. The truth was out, and everything was about to change. The look on Sarah's face said it all. Her confusion melted into horror, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. I'd barely started explaining when she interrupted, shaking her head as if to erase the words. Are you serious?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Emma and Mark?" I nodded, watching the devastation ripple across her face. "I didn't want to believe it myself, Sarah. But there's proof. On the dog cam." Her hands fell to her sides, her face pale. That camera was just supposed to keep an eye on Buddy while we were gone," she stammered, almost to herself. "I thought Mark was acting strange lately, but I never thought it was this." In that moment, I felt an odd, twisted connection with Sarah. We were both casualties of Emma and Mark's selfishness, both standing on the same scorched earth. "Do you want to see it?" I asked, holding up my phone. Part of me wasn't sure if showing her would help, but I knew from my own shock that seeing the betrayal with my own eyes had forced reality to sink in. She nodded, bracing herself as I pressed play. Her face twisted as the footage played, going from shock to heartbreak to fury in the span of seconds. And then, suddenly, her expression turned icy, and she let out a small, humorless laugh. "Oh, they have no idea what's coming," she murmured, her eyes blazing. "Josh, you have no idea how many secrets Mark has kept from me. But now," she looked up, her jaw set, "now he's going to regret every single one." Her reaction surprised me. This wasn't just a woman scorned. This was a woman ready to burn everything to the ground. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. "What are you thinking?" I asked, almost afraid to hear her answer. She squared her shoulders, suddenly looking calm and composed. "I'm thinking it's time Mark finds out what betrayal feels like. And I think Emma should experience a little taste of it too." She paused, tilting her head. "If you're interested, I have an idea." I blinked, caught off guard by the intensity in her eyes. "Go on." Sarah leaned in, her voice low. "Here's the plan. We play nice. We pretend we don't know anything, that everything's normal. Meanwhile, we gather evidence, solid evidence. And when the time is right, we hit them where it hurts." I could feel a dark satisfaction brewing in my chest. The thought of playing them at their own game was starting to feel cathartic. "And what then?" I asked. She smiled, a glint of cold steel in her eyes. "Then, we ruin them. We make them regret ever thinking they could play us like fools." In that moment, Sarah and I sealed a silent pact. We were no longer just neighbors, no longer just a pair of deceived spouses. We were partners in a scheme to reclaim our dignity, a plan to take back the control Emma and Mark had stolen from us. I knew it was risky, and I knew there was a chance everything would explode in our faces. But I was beyond caring. This was war now, and I was more than ready to fight. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I played the roles of clueless, unsuspecting spouses to perfection. It was surreal, like living in some twisted play where the actors didn't know their audience was watching, taking notes, and preparing for the final act. Every morning, I'd leave for work as if nothing had changed, and every evening, I'd return home and greet Emma with a smile that felt like a mask stapled to my face. We had meals together, we made small talk, and each time she laughed or brushed my arm, I felt a mix of fury and satisfaction. She had no idea what was coming. But Sarah? Sarah had become my partner in crime. Every few days, we'd meet up to swap updates and plot our next move. We'd exchange texts full of covert notes about what we'd overheard or things we'd managed to capture. We even shared screenshots of suspicious messages we'd managed to snag, building a mountain of evidence that was going to crush them when the time was right. One day, Sarah texted me, "Mark's meeting her at the park at noon. If you're free, bring the camera." I didn't hesitate. I took an early lunch break, grabbed a small camera, and met Sarah at the edge of the park. We spotted them immediately, Emma and Mark, nestled under a tree, cozied up like two love-struck teenagers. It took everything in me not to walk over there and rip him off that bench. But then Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Smile. Let's make this fun." She pulled her phone out and started snapping photos, first of them, and then a couple of us, pretending to be on some impromptu picnic. The irony wasn't lost on me. They thought they were sneaking around, but we were the ones calling the shots now. We collected everything: photos, videos, notes. By the end of each week, I had enough evidence to fill a hard drive. And every time I replayed the footage, every time I saw Emma's face next to his, it stung a little less. The anger burned hotter, and the sadness was replaced by a sense of anticipation. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. But Sarah had something else up her sleeve. "I think it's time we start having a little fun with them," she told me one night, a wicked smile on her face. "What do you mean?" I asked, intrigued. "Well," she began, "Mark's always been paranoid about his things, especially his phone. He never leaves it anywhere." She pulled a phone out of her bag, one that looked identical to Mark's. "I had a duplicate made. He won't even know the difference when he leaves his phone in the kitchen tonight and picks this one up instead." I was stunned. "Sarah, you're brilliant." Over the next few days, every text Emma sent to Mark, every pathetic excuse she gave me about late-night meetings or weekend errands, was stored right there in that clone phone. We had them, and the best part? They didn't have a clue. Finally, the day arrived. Sarah and I decided to throw a neighborly get-together at her house, an invitation they couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. It was time to set the stage for their final act. That evening, Emma and Mark arrived, all smiles, thinking they were about to enjoy a quiet dinner with their blissfully ignorant spouses. They didn't know it was all a setup. Sarah had prepared a little slideshow in the living room with a photo album innocently labeled Memories. Once they were settled in, Sarah pressed play, and the first image popped up on the TV, a picture of Mark and Emma cozying up at the park. Emma went white, her wine glass trembling in her hand. Mark's face contorted as he tried to process what he was seeing. But we didn't stop there. The slideshow moved on, showing every secret meeting, every touch, every lie they'd shared behind our backs. It was all there in full color, a digital testimony of their betrayal. Emma stammered, "Josh, I can explain. I'll just raise a hand. Don't bother, Emma. We've seen enough." The room went dead silent. Sarah, standing beside me, looked at Mark with icy calm. "And you? Do you have anything to say? Or are you just going to sit there like the spineless coward you are?" Mark opened his mouth, then closed it, his face a mask of horror. Emma tried to reach for my hand, desperation in her eyes. "Josh, please, it didn't mean anything. I was lonely, You think I care?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "You treated our marriage like a joke, and now you get to watch it all burn." "I hope it was worth it, Emma." They sat there, speechless, their worlds crashing around them, while Sarah and I exchanged a silent, satisfied glance. This was only the beginning of the end for them, and the start of our own escape from their lies. Emma and Mark sat frozen, pale and wide-eyed, their breaths coming in short gasps as each slide burned their betrayal into the room. I wanted to relish their discomfort, but I couldn't ignore the twinge of sadness creeping up my spine, the ghosts of trust and love that were now nothing but ashes. But I wasn't done yet. We weren't done. As the slideshow faded, Sarah leaned in, her voice soft but cutting. "We didn't invite you here for an apology," she said, her gaze steely on Mark. "We wanted you both to understand exactly how this ends." Mark shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain control. "Come on, Sarah, this is just ridiculous. You're blowing this out of proportion," he muttered, his face tight with desperation. He reached out to grab her arm, but she yanked it away, disgust etched into her expression. Ridiculous? Sarah's voice was icy. You think hiding behind my back and sneaking around with our neighbor's wife was no big deal? Emma turned to me, clutching my arm with desperation in her eyes. Josh, please, I know I hurt you. I know I made a mistake, but I still love you. We can work through this. We can fix it. I laughed, a dry, hollow sound that filled the room. Fix it? Emma, this isn't something a little therapy will fix. You shattered everything we had, and now you're here begging me to stay? You think love is still on the table? She opened her mouth to respond, but Sarah held up her hand, cutting her off. Enough. You've said more than enough already. She looked at me, a subtle nod, signaling the moment we'd planned. I turned to Emma, my voice calm and firm. We didn't just show you this to expose what you did. We showed you this to let you know how things are going to go from here. I pulled out a document from my coat pocket, the sharp edges crisp and clean. This is a legal separation agreement. You'll be out of the house by the end of the week, Emma, and that's non-negotiable. Emma's face crumpled, her defiance turning into panic. What? No, Josh, please. You can't throw me out. I don't have anywhere else to go. Funny, I replied, a dark satisfaction flooding me. I think Mark might have some extra space. I turned to him, arching an eyebrow. Isn't that right, Mark? Sarah couldn't help herself. She let out a laugh. Perfect. You two wanted each other so badly? Well, now's your chance. Good luck figuring it out on your own. Mark's composure shattered as he realized the full weight of what he'd done. Sarah, you don't mean that. We can work through this. It was a mistake, he stammered, panic flashing across his face. Let's talk about this, please. Oh, we're talking about it, all right, Sarah said smoothly, glancing at her watch. You have until tomorrow to get your things out of my house, Mark. I've already spoken to my lawyer. We're done. Emma's face went from shock to fury, her eyes blazing as she rounded on me. So that's it? You're just going to toss me aside? After everything I gave up for you? I stared at her, incredulous. You think you're the victim here? You betrayed me, Emma. You betrayed us. I don't owe you anything. Not my sympathy, not my support, and certainly not my home. A tense silence filled the room, punctuated only by the sound of Emma's angry, shallow breaths. Mark sat there, slumped and silent, fully realizing he'd lost everything in one fell swoop. Sarah gave a polite, almost mocking smile as she opened the door. This was a lovely evening, but I think it's time for you both to leave. Emma shot me one last look, a venomous mix of anger and regret, but I met her gaze with nothing but steely resolve. This was it, the final goodbye. She grabbed her purse, stormed out the door, and didn't look back. Mark hesitated, still trying to muster some sort of apology, but Sarah pointed to the door. Go, Mark. We're done. He staggered out, the door closing with a quiet finality behind him. As the silence settled, I turned to Sarah, feeling the weight of it all finally lifting from my shoulders. She looked at me, a faint smile playing on her lips. We did it. I nodded, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We did. In that moment, we were no longer two people broken by betrayal. We were survivors, stronger for the fire we'd been through. And as we stood there, side by side, I knew that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, a friendship forged in the ashes, maybe even more. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope.